There's a story about a family that was in line getting their bags checked at Atlanta airport. As they were in line, they noticed that up a couple people ahead of them was a family that had kind of given a tip to the sky cab, just to make sure that that individual would take good care of their bags, or at least make sure it got on the right plane. Well, that was very different from the guy that was directly in front of him. He was rude, he was arrogant, he got up, he was cussing loudly, there was no money exchanged at all, and he just continued to yell at the airport official, and especially when one of the bags accidentally tipped over, the guy was quite irate about that. His actions was done, and he stormed off to his gate. Well, the family, they came up to the sky cap, and the first thing they noticed was the guy's wide grin. It was just infectious. And they asked him, they said, how do you keep on smiling with such difficult people that you have to serve? And the sky cap said, well, what do you mean? And the family said, well, that fellow that just swore at you. The sky cap, he smiled again, and he just says, oh, that dude, people like him are easy. You see, he's heading to LA, but his bags are going to Detroit. The moral of the story is sometimes there is justice in the world. Today is an interesting one for us. We've been learning about these quirky characters called the judges in the Bible. The first was a man by the name of Ehud, who we learned was left-handed and used his ability to sneak in a weapon that killed the oppressor of the Israelis and ushered in 80 years of peace. Then we learned about Deborah, who we talked about was the first woman judge. And she was approached by the military leader of the Hebrew people looking for a means and a way to defeat the latest enemy of the Israeli people. And as we learned, that military leader was quite arrogant. And Deborah said to him, well, you will win, but the glory will go to a woman. And then last week, the cycle continued. If you notice a pattern emerging here of these 15 but judges, the cycle usually goes like this. Israel has peace. Israel does something evil in the sight of the Lord. Israel is occupied by a foreign power, always someone different. Israel cries out to God. God chooses a judge. The judge kicks out the oppressor, and then you have peace again, and then the cycle continues. Last week, a judge was chosen. His name is Gideon. And Gideon was a bit unique because Gideon did not want to be a judge. But God convinced him otherwise, and thankfully so, because Gideon was a great leader. Now, before we get to today's judge, a little background information here. Abimelech is the son of Gideon. And Abimelech grows up watching his dad say that he's not a king, but Gideon kind of likes the lifestyle of a king. Now, Abimelech is not like Gideon's other sons. Abimelech's mom is the mistress of Gideon. It's not the wife. And so he kind of has this illegitimate status. And maybe that's why he's not accepted by his half-brothers. Maybe that's why he's got this little chip on his shoulder for his brothers and for his dad. As an illegitimate son, a son who does not have the legitimacy of the other brothers, he's not content with such low status. And so what we find in the Bible is Abimelech's anger and hatred rear its ugly and brutal head. As the children did effectively, Abimelech wants to be king. And so I'm going to ask Max to read the first part of our passage for today.
Now Abimelech, son of Jerubbaal, went to Shechem to his mother's kinfolk and said to them and to the whole clan of his mother's family, say in the hearing of all the lords of Shechem, which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you, or that one rule over you? Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. So his mother's kinfolk spoke all these words on his behalf in the hearing of all the lords of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech. For they said, "He is our brother." They gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the temple of Baal-berith, with which Abimelech hired worthless and reckless fellows who followed him. He went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers and the sons of Jerubbaal, 70 men on one stone, but Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, survived, for he hid himself. Then all the lords of Shechem and all the Beth Millo came together, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar at Shechem.
Now, do you remember me telling you that this was in the age before Israel had a king? Well, that was a half-truth. This is years before Saul and David and Solomon, but as we find out, there was actually an ancient king of Israel. And there is a reason why Israel decided not to have a king, and it took so long before Saul comes on the stage, and it has to do with this story. Abimelech begins his rule, but he doesn't know anything about ruling. He likes the power and the prestige and having a nation serve him, and he's kind of different than the other judges, and that's pretty certain. The other judges are called by God, but not Abimelech. The other judges are brought up to fight a clear and present danger, but not Abimelech. Those judges brought peace, not Abimelech. And some of the Hebrew people are beginning to second guess their decision. Maybe Abimelech is just not the right person. So they begin a revolt. And Abimelech hires some thugs to crush the rebellion at Shechem. They attack and they kill everyone in sight. And what does Abimelech do? He goes to the city and he scatters salt all over the city to signify that everything is destroyed and there is no hope for survival. But there were some survivors. They go to a tower at Shechem and they lock themselves into it. And so Abimelech, he sends his thugs to go and set the tower on fire. And right there kills 1,000 men and women. Now here is a simple question for the people of the Bible. What in the world happened here? I mean, Abimelech's dad, Gideon, is a great guy. He's a guy that he led 300 Hebrew warriors in just a creative and cunning way to defeat the people of Midian. Obviously, a shift has taken place here. The people of Israel are broken. And here in this moment, a broken judge leads a very broken people. One Sunday morning, an old cowboy decided to go to church, and when services were just about to begin, and although the old man and his clothes were spotlessly clean, he wore jeans, a denim shirt, and boots, and they were very worn and ragged. In his hand, he carried a worn-out old cowboy hat and an equally worn-out Bible. The church he entered was a very upscale church. It was in a well-to-do section of town. And when the old cowboy came in, he was not greeted by anybody. He sat down, and everyone kind of moved away from him. No one greeted him. No one spoke to him. No one even welcomed him in. They were all appalled at his appearance, and no one attempted to hide it. As that old cowboy was leaving church, the pastor came up to him and says, before you come back in here again, have a talk with God and ask him what God would think would be appropriate time for worship. Now the old cowboy assured that he would talk to God. So the next Sunday he showed back up at the services wearing the same ragged jeans and shirt and boot and hat. And once again he was completely shunned and ignored. The preacher approached the man and says, I thought I asked you to speak to God before you came back to our church. I did, replied the old cowboy. Well, if you spoke to God, said the preacher, what did he tell you was the proper attire for worshiping here? Well, sir, said the cowboy, God told me that he didn't have a clue what I should wear. He said he'd never been in this church before. Is there redemption here? I think we're going to find out. Max, would you conclude our story for today?
Then Abimelech went to Thebez and encamped against Thebez and took it. But there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and women and all the lords of the city fled to it and shut themselves in. And they went to the roof of the tower. Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it, and came near to the entrance of the tower to burn it with fire. But a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Immediately he called to the young man who carried his armor and said to him, "Draw your sword and kill me, so people will not say about me, 'A woman killed him.'" So the young man thrust him through, and he died. When the Israelites saw that Abimelech was dead, they all went home. Thus God repaid Abimelech for the crime he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers.
There is so much that could be said about this passage. There are so many directions to go. I would love to address the sexism of this passage. Draw your sword and kill me, so people will not say about me, 'A woman killed him.' But that really doesn't address the subtitle for today's message, which is Abimelech versus everyone. And that's actually based on the preceding verse. But a certain woman threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. I'm going to ask the ushers now to hand out some pebbles. So come on down and hand out these pebbles. And I want to thank Tim Maxey for donating these pebbles. Tim likes to polish rocks, and so these are some pebbles. So go ahead and take a pebble from one of the ushers here, and let me grab a couple so that for a couple of folks up here. Max, will you give one to Lindsay there? Thank you. All right. And as these pebbles are being distributed, do you remember a few weeks ago we had a sermon series called Half-Truths? And in that story, Adam Hamilton tells the story about a man who lived a year following the Bible precisely. And so what he would do is he would actually carry pebbles in his pocket, and he would purposely stone people for offenses that were considered stoning in the Bible. Now, it is not my intention for any of you to do any stoning with this pebble. This pebble is a symbol. Just look what it means to the biblical story. The people of God are feeling helpless. They put their trust in the son of a beloved judge and are saying to themselves, what could go wrong? And then he murders all of his brothers, and they're saying to themselves, well, that's just what leaders do. You read any history books, and you see that's what leaders do. They consolidate power. And then he crowns himself king. And they say to themselves, what's the big deal? All of the other nations around Israel all have kings. And then he crushes the revolt at Shechem. And the people begin to say, well, we can't say anything. We might be next. And then we get trapped in the tower of Thebez, and we realize we are next. And we didn't say anything. Martin Niemöller was a Lutheran pastor during Nazi Germany. And he wrote a poem that many of you have heard of. It goes like this. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Now, I have seen this poem used in ways it's not intended. But at its core, it is written to be personal. It is a message that we, that I need to stamp out injustice and evil and oppression in whatever forms it presents itself. If that phrase sounds familiar to you, it's because you have said it. Every time that we have a baptism up here, every time that we have a confirmation service, every time that we have a reaffirmation of our vows, we reaffirm before God and this church that we will be this pebble. There are times that this work cannot fall on anyone else. You, and only you, have the ability to stamp out injustice and evil and oppression in whatever forms it presents themselves. Former President Jimmy Carter said one time in an interview, "Most church members, including me, rarely reach out to people who are different from us or less fortunate. Quite often my Sunday school class will say, 'Why don't we take up a collection and give a nice Thanksgiving meal to a poor family?' The next question is, who knows a poor family? Nobody does. We have to call the welfare office to get the name and address." I want you to keep this pebble in your pocket. Because justice, doing the work of justice, is not a send money approach. It is not, let's send someone down to the welfare office kind of ministry. When you reach into your pocket and feel this pebble, it means that you're going to get your hands dirty. It means that you're going to have to stick out your neck for what is right and just. And it means you're going to be unpopular. And I hate to tell you, you're going to lose friends on Facebook. I one time preached on this subject, and I had a parishioner who owned a garage. He employed his brother-in-law because his brother-in-law needed a job. And the parishioner told me that he was thinking about letting his relative go, but he couldn't. How could he face his sister? How could he look at his nieces and nephews knowing that he just fired their dad? But his business was suffering, and the guy was making it worse. And he didn't know what to do. And then this message of Scripture hit him that the means to make a difference lies in your grip. Sometimes you need to stand alone with the millstone. Sometimes you need to stand on principle and make the hard choices. And sometimes the pebble will be in your hand to act for justice, to speak out against injustice, and to do what is right, even at great cost. My parishioner told me that he did let his brother-in-law go. It was a tough decision, but it was best for his business, and it was best for his brother-in-law. It reduced the tension in his family, and his brother-in-law found a job in a line of work that he was better suited. Yes, we are a broken people. And yes, it is why there is injustice in this world. But trust me, we serve a faithful God who is watching out for us and expects us to use our abilities to speak for justice, to speak out against oppression, and to fight evil in whatever forms it presents themselves. And sometimes it means we have to stand alone. I love this quote. It just says, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." St. Telemachus was a 4th century monk who lived in a monastery, and he felt God calling him to Rome. And he couldn't figure out why God would call him to Rome, but he just felt this pressure to go. So he packed all of his belongings into a satchel, and he went to Rome. And when he gets to Rome, the people are running all about this great city. He arrived on the day when the gladiators were about to face each other. And everyone was headed to the amphitheater for the entertainment. And Telemachus thought, this must be why God called me to Rome. He walked to the amphitheater. He sat among 80,000 people who cheered as the gladiators came out proclaiming, "Hail Caesar! We die to the glory of Caesar." The little monk thought to himself, here we are, 4 centuries after Christ in a civilized nation, and people are killing one another for the entertainment of the crowd. This isn't Christian. Telemachus gets up out of the seat. He runs down the stairs. He climbs over the wall. He walks out into the center of the amphitheater, and he stands between two large gladiators. And he puts his hands up and he meekly cries out, "In the name of Christ, stop!" And everyone in the crowd laughs at him. One of the gladiators actually takes his sword and slaps him in the stomach that just kind of sends Telemachus spinning. Telemachus, he gets it back up again, and he stands between these two huge gladiators, and he says, "In the name of Christ, stop!" And with that, the crowd begins to chant, "Run him through." And one of the gladiators takes out his sword and thrusts it right into Telemachus' stomach. He falls into the dust. The sand begins to turn red as the blood comes out of him. And one last time, Telemachus weakly cries out, "In the name of Christ, stop." And there's silence in the amphitheater. Everyone begins to empty out. And the history books tell us that this was the last time that there was a gladiator fight in the history of Rome. You know, no one ever told me that following Christ would be easy. When I was in confirmation class, when I was in seminary, when I was being ordained, no one ever said, "Hey, Seth, this is going to be a walk in the park." There have been moments when you have to stand alone for what is right before God. And it's lonely. Serving a broken people means injustice and oppression and evil will yield its ugly head. But rest assured, I've read the end of the book and we win. So I want you to hold your pebble proudly and stand before a faithful God who asks you to do all you can for what is just in the world. Amen. We want to thank the ushers for doing double duty for us, and now we ask them to wait upon us as we get back to God.